Good evening. I'm Councillor Lynn Doherty, the leader of West Berkshire Council and chairman of the executive. Welcome to this executive meeting on Thursday, the 29th of April. I'm being supported at this meeting by the deputy leader, Councillor Graham Bridgman. The other members of the executive present are Councillors Steve Arderwater, Dominic Bowick, Hilary Cole, Ross McKinnon, Richard Sumner, Joe Stewart, and Howard Wollaston. Members of the Shadow Executive and the leader of the Minority Green Party are in attendance. These members are entitled to speak and ask questions when invited to do so by myself. Other members of council are also in attendance in the virtual waiting room and can ask questions on any items included on the agenda. They will do this by indicating electronically, and I will then invite them to be brought in from the virtual waiting room for their questions to be answered. Members who are not on the executive are not able to vote on any of the agenda items. There are also a number of officers in attendance, and they include Nick Carter, our Chief Executive Officer, and our Executive Directors, Sue Halliwell and Joseph Holmes, and Matt Pearce, our Service Director for Communities and Wellbeing. Shiraz Sheikh will be the legal advisor to the meeting. I'm assisted by Linda Pye, the clerk to the meeting, and by Stephen Chard, who will be acting as the Zoom host. I will now ask Linda Pye to give some reminders about the way we conduct council meetings via Zoom.
Thank you, Leader. Members, standard Zoom reminders are now being shown on screen. In addition to those points, if it becomes necessary for any members to telephone into the meeting, you won't be able to signal to speak. So once everyone who has raised a Zoom hand has spoken, the leader will be asked to invite anyone who has telephoned in to speak in order. Any voting necessary will take place by a physical show of hands. If we need to adjourn the meeting at any point, the leader will adjourn and will advise the executive of the revised time and date of the meeting. If it is a short adjournment, you will be able to rejoin this Zoom meeting. Otherwise, a fresh appointment will be sent out. Do members have any questions about the way in which the meeting will be conducted before we proceed?
Thank you, Linda. In which case we can move to item 1 on this evening's agenda, which is apologies. Linda, do we have any apologies for absence?
We've had apologies from Andy Sharp and Matt Pearce is substituting.
Thank you, Linda. Therefore, can we move to item 2 on this evening's agenda, which is the minutes from the previous meeting of the 25th of March. Members, does anyone have any points to raise with regards to the minutes? I can see Councillor Brooks, your hand went up there.
Yes, Leader, can you hear me properly?
We can.
I'm always worried about my squeaky voice fault.
No, you're fine.
On page 15 of your agenda, and within the minutes, Councillor Tony Vickers has asked me to clarify something. You'll see three paragraphs up from resolved paragraph. Councillor Tony Vickers agreed that plans for the site should be progressed, and this would be at the area of planning. He believes he said something more along the lines that he agreed that the plans should come before the area planning committee for resolution to see if they're acceptable or not. And he's concerned that it shouldn't be read that he was agreeing with the plans, and the distinctions ought to be made in his view, Leader.
Right, okay, I appreciate that point of view, and I don't recollect the exact conversation, but I have no issue with making that change. Does anybody else have an issue with that change or a different recollection? No, in which case that's fine. We will make that amendment, Councillor Brooks. Can I ask then, is there any other points that anyone would like to raise on the minutes? Councillor Sumner.
Thank you, Leader. All I would say, and it's actually related to the previous point, is that, of course, they are recorded. So for absolute clarity, it can be played back and that can be corrected accordingly.
Okay. Can we note to do that, please, Linda? Okay, in which case, with that that check and that amendment, if necessary, I'm happy to propose these minutes from the chair. Does that find a seconder?
Does indeed, Leader.
Can I then please ask executive members to indicate by raising the actual hand if they agree the minutes can be signed as a true and accurate record of the previous meeting?
Thank you, Leader. I confirm and declare that the minutes have been approved subject to that amendment. And if you're happy, we'll add your electronic signatures to the approved minutes.
That's fine, Shiraz. Thank you. Please do. Okay. In which case, let's move on to item 3, declarations of interest. Has anybody had a declaration of interest for this particular meeting? Councillor Brooks, is that an old hand you've got up?
No,
Apologies.
it's a new hand. It's a new hand.
A new hand, sorry.
Do forgive me. I've just received confirmation of apologies from Councillor Lee Dillon and Councillor Tony Vickers. I do apologise for not saying that during the apologies point. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That will be noted. Councillor Macro.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, I'd just like to. We have several questions on the agenda tonight about Redibus. One of my daughters is a client of Redibus, although she's not a resident of West Berkshire, but I thought I should make that clear.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Macro. Okay, can we then move on to item 4 on this evening's agenda, which is our public questions. So I would first of all like to thank all the members of the public that have submitted questions for this evening's executive meeting, and welcome those of you able to be in attendance to hear the answers to your questions and to ask a supplementary question if you have one. For those public questioners unable to join this meeting, I can confirm that you will receive a written response to your questions, and these will be published on the Council's website within 5 clear working days of this meeting. Please note that in accordance with the new processes, you will not need to say, I asked the question standing in my name. Your question will appear on the screen and will be answered by the relevant portfolio holder. You will then be given the opportunity to ask a supplementary question. But please do remember that this must be to clarify the response provided and not to introduce any new business or make statements. In accordance with paragraph 5.12.9 of the Constitution, where questioners have more than one question, only their first question will be answered. If after all other questions have been asked and answered, and there is sufficient time, we will answer subsequent questions. Please note that the time limit for public questions is restricted to 30 minutes. And if your questions have not been answered in that time, you will receive a written response within 5 clear working days of the meeting. The responses given either verbally at the meeting or in writing will be published on the Council's website. I see a couple of hands have gone up, so I'll just take those hands before I move on. Councillor Macro.
Sorry, Leader, that's a hangover from before.
Okay, Stephen.
Yeah, just to advise that at the moment, so Mr. Goatley and Mr. Foote hadn't joined us, but then someone had just popped in the waiting room. No, it's still the case that those members of the public haven't joined us at this stage.
So Mr. Goatley and Mr.
Foote.
Foote, okay. Thank you, Stephen. In which case we'll proceed with question A, and I would like to invite Councillor Hilary Cole to answer Mr. Paul Morgan's question A on the agenda.
Thank you, Leader, and thank you for your question, Mr. Morgan. We're in the process of investigating the feasibility for a housing company and will, if the case is proven, set up a company by the end of the year. The housing company proposal is a key objective in the Council's new housing strategy and its supporting delivery plan. The initial objective is to provide much needed affordable rented housing for residents of West Berkshire. You have a supplementary question.
Yes, can you hear me okay?
I can, yes.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, thank you for that response, Councillor Cole. You already do have a joint venture organisation with Sovereign Housing, I believe. So the reason for the question primarily is that we could get a situation whereby a council-owned housing company seeks planning permission on a council-owned piece of ground. So in that situation, how does a council avoid any conflict of interest in that situation? For example, you are the chair of the Western Area or on the Western Area Planning, but how will you resolve that sort of conflict of interest if that does go ahead?
Well, Mr. Morgan, there are very clear rules and guidelines where the council as landowner and the council of the local planning as a local planning authority operate, and there has to be a clear distinction between the two so that there is no conflict of interest, and that is taken into account.
Thank you both. Thank you both for your questions. Can we therefore move on to, I think if we haven't got question B, we need to move on to question D on our agenda this evening. Stephen, I'm looking at you to guide me that we still haven't got a question from Mr. Goatley. So can we move to item D on this evening's agenda, which is a question from Mr. Lee McDougall to Councillor Howard Wollaston.
Thank you, Mr. McDougall. Assuming the proposal is approved by executive this evening, I'm sorry, I thought someone said I was on mute. I don't think I am.
You're not. We can hear you perfectly. Thank you, Councillor.
I thought someone said I was on mute. I do apologize.
No.
I'll start again. Assuming that the proposal is approved by executive this evening, the planning application will be submitted late next month or very early June, concurrently with using delegated authority to start the process of appointing a contractor using the UK Framework Leisure Access Agreement. This approach has been approved by the Procurement Board. We expect to award the contract by the end of July, allowing construction to commence by the end of August or early September, and the site to be operational for football use by the end of March. Do you have a supplementary, Mr. McDougall?
Hi, yes, sorry, I realised I was on mute and not on video. Yeah, no, thank you for that. I just didn't catch the end of the planning timescale and the start of the construction, and if I missed them in your update.
It's impossible to say, Mr. McDougall. The planning process has to have its due course.
It was just your target date. I mean, you obviously got a plan. If you've got an end date, you must have some estimated dates in the middle.
Well, I've already said what I think the construction start date will be. I think I said to you the early September.
September, okay, sorry I missed that.
So we're assuming a 2-month planning process.
Okay,
thank you very much.
Thank you both. Can we move on to question E then, which is Mr. Vaughan Miller to Councillor Howard Wollaston.
Thank you for your question, Councillor Miller. The executive this evening is approving the land deal. As stated in my previous answer, the construction contract will be awarded in accordance with the Constitution and delegated powers contained therein using the framework agreement, given that the capital expenditure has previously been approved within the 2021-22 capital budget. Do you have a supplementary?
Okay, Stephen, have we got Mr. Miller in the room, or is he not here?
He's just unmuted. Yep.
Hi, apologies. Yes, so you're agreeing the land deal. Is there any agreement tonight on the capital costs and the sink fund and other costs?
Very Councillor Miller, that's contained within part 2.
Okay, thank you both for your questions. Can we therefore move on to item G on our agenda, which is Mr. Alan Pearce, again to Councillor Howard Wollaston.
Thank you for your question, Mr. Pearce. The reports before members this evening detail all the relevant information to allow them to make an informed decision on the proposed sports ground at Monks Lane. To clarify, the forward plan is a summary to indicate the topics for discussion and the decision to be made. Do you have a supplementary?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Sorry, when you started speaking, and because it's refreshing. You don't hear the first bit of what the councillors are saying. So I've missed the very first, just into the conversations. Can you repeat it? Because I've lost the context of exactly what you're saying.
Sorry, it is Mr. Pearce, isn't it? I've got so many questions tonight, I'm rather losing track.
Yeah, sure. Sorry, but I just didn't get a bit.
No problem. Yeah. I said the reports before members this evening detail all the relevant information to allow them to make an informed decision on the proposed sports ground at Monks Lane. To clarify, the forward plan is a summary to indicate the topics for discussion and the decision to be made.
Do you have a supplementary, Mr. Pearce?
Yes, I do. Can I just clarify first, please? Are you making a decision then on this is the replacement for Faraday Road, is it? Can you just clarify that? Because that's a bit I'm not sure about.
Well, it's not relevant to the discussion. This is a new sports ground in Monks Lane.
Oh, so it could be or it couldn't be. It's not necessarily the replacement then. What I'm trying to say is what you're actually voting on tonight is for a land agreement for the council to comply with the council planning pitch policy strategy document to cover the shortfall in pitches. It's it's a separate thing. It's not necessarily
your supplementary, Mr. Pearce?
Well, yeah, I think that.
Okay, Councillor Wollaston, are you able to answer that question?
I'm not sure I totally follow it, to be honest.
Well, shall I give you?
You've asked your supplementary question. Thank you, Mr.
Sorry,
Pearce.
I was just going to clarify. That was all. Do you want me to clarify for you? Or?
The paper this evening is on the sports pitch at Monks Lane. Was the clarification, Mr. Pearce?
Okay, that's fine then. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, can we move on to item H on our agenda this evening, which is to Mr. Gary Norman to Councillor Howard Wollaston.
Thank you for your question, Mr. Norman. As I've stated in answer to a previous question, we will seek and receive quotes from specialist contractors using the framework agreement. Once this is completed, the council will know the definitive cost of the project and financial reporting will be carried out through the normal channels. That is to say, quarterly updates to the executive on capital expenditure against budget. The construction costs which we have are all estimates. There are no agreements underpinning them, and as such, until the agreements are in place, they will be considered as commercially sensitive for the bidders. We have used estimated costs to inform our capital budget. They are much wider than just for the construction element. Once the deal is done on both the lease and the construction elements, then these figures will be publicly available. Do you have a supplementary?
Yes, well, I did have a supplementary, but you, as you've just clarified, that you are now not associating the new ground with as a replacement for Faraday Road. And if you're actually confirming that, and thank you for confirming that publicly, then I'll withdraw my supplementary question and say thank you for your answer. Thank you.
I don't actually believe that Councillor Wollaston did confirm that, but thank you for your questions. Can we move on then to item J on our agenda this evening, which is Mr. Nigel Foot, who I believe is now with us. So Mr. Nigel Foot, question J on the agenda to Councillor Wollaston.
Could the council please confirm exactly what additional details and documentation will be made available to the public with respect to the Newbury Rugby Club proposal prior to any legally binding documents are signed? Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Mr. Foot. Some minor bits of detailed design are still being worked up, but I can confirm that full details of the proposals will be provided into the public domain with the planning application. The agreement to lease and associated agreements will be signed assuming executive approval tonight, but that is not legally binding as it is dependent on achieving planning consent. Do you have a supplementary?
Well, I do, please, yes. What I'd like to say is that in view of this council's poor track record on procurement projects, would the executive not agree that it would be a good idea to make as much of the proposals for the football pitch at Newbury Rugby Club public so that proper scrutiny can be made of these proposals and hopefully save another £943,000 being wasted, as was the case with the St Moden fiasco at London Road Industrial Estate?
I think this is a very different circumstance to the one you're describing. This is a pretty straightforward construction project. So I'm afraid so I disagree with you.
Okay, thank you both. Can we therefore move on to item C on our agenda, which is Mr. Paul Morgan to Councillor Howard Wollaston?
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. We've excluded running costs from the Part 1 report on the basis that it is confidential, commercially sensitive information, and the deal has not been finalised. The running costs are part of the ongoing discussions within the joint use agreement, which seeks, amongst other things, to find cost savings through shared services such as ground staff. The construction costs, which have been included in the Part 2 papers, are all estimates. There are no agreements underpinning them, and as such, until the agreements are in place, they will be considered as commercially sensitive from the tenderers. Once it is done on both the land and construction elements, those figures will be publicly available. Do you have a supplementary?
Yes, I do. Can you hear me, Councillor Wollaston?
Yeah, I can.
Yeah, thank you for that response. Yeah, just picking up a couple of points. So you say that it's an estimate for the capital cost of that, and I think you've been quoted as saying 2 million. So why is that in Part 2? Is the first part of it? And secondly,
that's your question, is it, Councillor Morgan?
No, Mrs. Dockley, please be respectful. I'm trying to get some answer here. Now,
I'm sorry, Mr. Morgan. You're allowed a supplementary question. This isn't
I would, if you bear with me.
Councillor Wollaston, would you like to answer that supplementary question?
Certainly. I don't think I've ever said that it would cost £2 million.
I think it. Why is it in Part 2 then? Why is it? Please explain why is this in Part 2? That's my question.
Because it's confidential information.
But why, if it's an estimate?
Okay, thank you very much, everybody. We're going to move on now to question F on our agenda this evening, which is Councillor Vaughan Miller.
Right. Thank you, Councillor Miller. The playing pitch strategy approved by the Council in February 2020 clearly stated that the replacement for Faraday Road needed to be step 6 with ability to progress to step 5. This strategy was supported and approved by Sport England and the Football Association. Council made it clear that the project is designed to meet the requirements of the playing pitch strategy, and it has been. Sorry, I do apologise. I do apologise. Sorry, and has been enhanced the offer by proposing a 3G service, enabling far greater community opportunity to play and enjoy sport and achieving steps 4 facility. The initial view of the Council's consultants is that it may be possible to raise this to a step 2 facility in the future, but this would require considerable additional expenditure, which is certainly not justified at the present time. Do you have a supplementary?
Yes, I do. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Thank you. So, I mean, basically, it's been 5 years since Newbury Football Club played at step 5, right? They were relegated down to step 4, purely down to the, to be frank, actions of this council, because they couldn't get security of tenure, not for football reasons. Who's to say they wouldn't now be playing at step 3 or step 2, like Thatcham and Hungerford, much smaller towns? So,
Councillor Miller, is that your supplementary about the comment around what step they would be playing at?
So, would this have a capacity to go to step 2? That's the main thing. We know that Faraday Road will.
Thank you for your supplementary question, Councillor Miller. Councillor Wollaston, are you able to answer that?
Yeah, Councillor, I think I've already answered the question, to be honest. Our consultants say that it may be possible to get to step 2, but it is so premature that it's clearly involve massive additional expenditure, which is not viable at the moment.
Okay, thank you both. Can we move on to item I, or question I, apologies, which is Mr. Lee McDougall to Councillor Howard Wollaston.
Thank you for your further question, Mr. McDougall. The Council have operated in accordance with its consultation policy, which is compliant with the Local Government Association Code.
Sorry, I think we've got the wrong question on the screen. Is
Sorry, I've had so many. I'm getting slightly confused, Zini. Which is your question?
Okay. That makes sense now. Thank you.
Yes.
Yep. All good.
Should I carry on?
Please.
There have been multiple opportunities for general public and interested parties to engage with officers. This process, which has been going on for several months, has resulted in some specific changes to improve the offer and ensure that it serves the community well into the future. Not only did we undergo a full public consultation, but I personally took part in a publicly open webinar. As I've stated, the capital budget was approved by executive in an open forum. So we've more than complied with all consultation requirements. Do you have a supplementary?
I do, yes. It's just that the consultation that you did was for a very high level schematic that was dated November 2020, and I think it's now changed and there were no costs. So it's difficult to see how the public can be consulted on a scheme that doesn't have any detail, that's out of date and doesn't have any costs. That's why we'd be keen to make sure that you undertook some future consultation when the proper details are available. Are you saying that you won't consult anymore when the details are available?
Be consultant in that there'll be a planning application which people will be able to
With the planning process.
In the planning process.
Thank you both. My notes have gone out of sync slightly because I've got so I think I've got another question coming up from Mr. Alan Pearce, according to my notes, but I may be wrong because it was
question K. I've got it.
Yes.
Thank you for your question, Mr. Pearce. I think your question has already been answered in correspondence with the leader and one of the council's officers. However, for the benefit of transparency to the public, we confirm the item to be correctly listed as an update on the playing pitch strategy. As you're aware, Newbury Sports Ground has been through the executive previously and had been on the forward plan. The 14th January 2021 report was very clear that there will be a further report to the executive with the final documents. The executive this evening has before it in part 2 the final documents and will make a decision on whether the documents which represent the deal are approved or not. The executive will have all the relevant information and as such will have the full implications before them. Do you have a supplementary?
Yes, I do. Thank you. Thank about Arju. I'm struggling to understand what's being done here. So perhaps my supplementary question is do you believe the executive think they're voting on approving a replacement ground for Faraday Road?
No, we're voting on the Monks Lane for sports ground.
Right, I understand now. Thank you very much.
Thank you both for your questions. Now, I understand that Mr. Goatley is now in the room. So can we return, Linda? Can you bring back up question B on our agenda this evening? And that's to Councillor Ross McKinnon.
Thanks, Leader, and thanks, Mr. Goatley. I hope you're well. The simple answer to your question is no, it isn't. Do you have a supplementary?
Is Mr. Goatley, do you have a supplementary?
Yeah, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Oh, good. Sorry about that. Major computer problems this end. Yeah, but thank you, Mr. McKinnon. Trust you're well for that. The bit that worries me is, and I might be being a bit on the thick side here, but the Amerson Young viability study had no costings, and so as a viability study is about as much use as a cat flap in a submarine. So I wonder if you could explain what the real purpose of wasting that money was.
Thanks, Mr. Goatley. Notwithstanding my slight disagreement about your characterisation of the cat flap and the submarine and the wasting of the money, let me go into a bit more detail. So there's no manipulation. The council, as the local planning authority, is pursuing a robust local plan, as you know. And the water cycle study forms a part of that. But on the other hand, the council as the landowner is entitled to look at what's commercially possible in developing the London Road industrial estate. So that approach demonstrates clear separation between the council as the landowner and the local planning authority. One study doesn't, and it shouldn't, dictate the outcomes of the other. So the council's followed a logical sequence of events here. First, we have a look at the market forces in relation to the assets that we own in the LRIE and have a think about what redevelopment could be commercially delivered. And once that's done, once that viability has been confirmed, then we look at the environmental constraints that might affect that viability, the flood mitigation, the ground remediation, changes to the highway, and so on. Now, I've explained numerous occasions, actually, at Exec and Council's meetings and answers to public questions very similar to this one, that it wouldn't have been logical to spend money, possibly in excess of the cost of the development brief itself, looking at site constraints and mitigation costs, only to learn later that the commercial constraints rendered redevelopment impractical, regardless of the cost of those mitigation works. So let me put your mind at rest. The environmental impact study the council is about to commission should be largely complete by the end of the year, and that will further inform viability and what the council can achieve in redeveloping the estate. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, both of you. That concludes our public questions this evening. Thank you all for your attendance tonight. Can we therefore move on to item 5, which is petitions? And I understand that Councillor Macro, you have a petition that you would like to submit.
Yes, Leader, I have two petitions, in fact. The first one is calling upon West Berkshire Council to impose a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit on Crown Lane and Blossom Lane in Thiel. This is to improve safety for pedestrians and children who are endangered by speeding traffic. That petition has 93 names. And also the second one, but you can just bear with me while I get the wording up. This one is calling upon West Berkshire Council to impose a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit on Meadow Way and roads off in Thiel. This is to improve safety for pedestrians, children and vehicle occupants who are endangered by speeding traffic. That has 135 names. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Macro. I understand that there's been no contact with the portfolio holder with regards to this, and then there is a process that these could go through, but we will take them away and have a look at that. Can we move on then to item 6 on our agenda this evening, which is the devolution of Hermitage Green? And I understand that Councillor Richard Sumner, you wish to introduce this report.
Indeed, Leader. Yes, thank you.
And does that report find a seconder tonight? Councillor Cole, thank you. Over to you, Councillor Sumner.
Thank you, Leader. This report, I believe, is straightforward and is the final stage in the joint discussion with Hermitage Parish Council. A heads of terms agreement is in place with both organisations in broad agreement to provide a 75-year lease to the parish for the area of land. With the transfer lease also goes a small amount of financial contribution from commuted developer monies. That's just slightly over £11,000. And I understand that in accordance with ROSPA report that's been carried out, there are some minor works which we've committed to undertaking before the final handover is completed. In all honesty, Leader, I believe this is largely uncontroversial. It'll allow the parish to adopt and manage this area according to their local needs and with their local community. And I'm happy to propose a recommendation to the executive as detailed in item 2.1. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sumner. Members of the executive, do we have any questions for Councillor Sumner? Councillor Cole, is there anything you would like to add to this?
No, I just want to endorse what Councillor Sumner has said. It's the wish of Hermitage Parish Council to take over the management of this land, and I fully support them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Macro, I see you have your hand up. No, it's an old hand. Any other questions with regards to this paper this evening? Okay, in which case the recommendation is that the land is transferred to Hermitage Parish Council on a long lease of at least 75 years. Please can executive members vote by raising their actual hand in favour of the proposal to approve the recommendation?
Thank you, Leader. I confirm that the recommendation has been approved.
Thank you, Shiraz. Can we move on to item 7 then, which is the risk management strategy? Councillor Wollaston, I understand that you wish to introduce this report, but can I just ask, does it find a seconder?
Yes, Leader.
Councillor Stewart. Thank you very much, Councillor Stewart. Over to you, Councillor Wollaston.
Thank you, Leader. Risk management is a very important area of West Berkshire Council's internal governance process and represents a prudent approach to the running of the council. The risk register is a dynamic document updated quarterly, the most recent being quarter 3, with already one of the risks being downgraded in the light of new information. The key changes are a slight increase to the risk appetite, details are in sections 7.3 and 8.8 of the appendix. The risk matrix section 8.11, again in the appendix, moves a score of 8 from the red rag rating to amber, which have implications of escalation of risks and the levels of the organisation where these are managed. We should maintain a risk-aware culture through a common language, training and engagement, with a particular focus on the involvement of councillors through more in-depth training. This strategy has already come before the Governance and Ethics Committee and has been considered and approved. I would hope that in the light of the above, that this will be regarded as an uncontentious report, and I would like to propose it.
Thank you, Councillor Wollaston. Members of the executive, any questions for Councillor Wollaston? Councillor Stewart, do you wish to speak now, or shall I go across the room?
I'll reserve my right. Thank you, Leader.
Members of the opposition, is there anything you would like to ask on this particular paper? Councillor Brooks, I see that little finger's gone up.
Thank you very much. May I start by saying that I was pleased to see this come forward. I think it's well put together. I like the fact that it's now got objectives highlighted in a strategy, which is all about objectives and goals. And I wonder if my keep pushing at that door has led to a bit of a change. Councillor McKinnon will know what I'm talking about. So I was pleased to see the format and the thoroughness of this. It's clear that the executive are looking to be a little bit more risk aware and take a little bit more of a broader approach to risk, and we feel that's welcomed as well. Of course, we'll blame you if you get it wrong, but having said that, well done in considering how you manage risk. So I'm going to ask Councillor Wollaston to clarify a few points. I hope he will slow down on his answers. He seems to have a train to catch tonight, and he's rattling off answers at record speed. So I'm sorry if I'm keeping him for anything, but at my time of life, if you could speak a little bit more slowly, Councillor Wollaston, even if you have a prepared script. So page 43, if I may start with, we talk about focus on the involvement of councillors through more in-depth training. It's a very easy one to simply say we're going to train the councillors properly. Councillors generally have quite a lot of experience in many walks of life. And I'd like to make sure there's also emphasis on training our managers, our budget holders as well, because it's fair to say, without being too critical, that many of our senior managers may have worked here quite a long time and only worked in the public sector. And I think that they will need training as well. So I'd like clarification on that. But if Councillor Wilson stays with me for a moment, I've got 3 other points. The next one is on page 53, which I'm just scrolling down to now.
Give me, Councillor, could you just tell me the page, the first item you were raising, so I can just
Page
look at it as we go?
43, sir.
Thank you very much.
I wasn't sure on page 53, impact rating, and on row 2, legal litigation, regulatory contract, being challenged, but with certainty that the council will win it. I don't think you can ever be certain in anything that might go legal. So I think that one might need just a little bit of finessing, or because, as I say, if you're in a legal situation, there's no such thing as a slam dunk. Then on page 56, we talk about the council is not willing to operate with the risks that expose the organisation to an estimated current stroke actual financial loss or cost of above £3 million for any individual risk. And I accept that. But what I wonder, if you look at aggregated risk, if your risk register suddenly shows you a risk of 27 million made up of 9 times £3 million risk, and I'm just giving examples, you're suddenly in some serious risk. So I think you might want to think about a total or aggregate risk, but I appreciate the one project or initiative for any individual risk being 3 million. Certainly accept that. And finally, and thank you for letting me put these points, page 61. Is me missing the point. Forget page 61. There's 3 points there for you, Councillor Wollaston.
Thank you very much. I will try and speak slow, but I had so many questions to get through tonight. I just wanted to get them done.
I thought you were due out for some swanky dinner in a a pub garden or something, that you were in a rush to get away, sir.
I could only wish, Councillor Brooks. Firstly, on your point on page 43, I think the intention here is to bring all councillors up to the same level. I accept that some will ought to be very conscious of risk profiles and so forth. Others obviously won't.
And for our senior officers, directors, similar training, sir. That was the other context I put it in.
Yes, I would agree with that too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're all singing for the same hymn tune in this one. I'd like to take back the issue on the legal point you raised on page 53 and take some further advice on that, if I may, and come back to you with a written response. And your final point, I think, was on page 55, wasn't it?
56, page 56.
I'm sorry. Let's have a look at it.
That was to do with aggregate risk.
Yes, I can see your point, but I can't see how we can really get around it. By definition, with the spread of services that the council offers across adult social care to education, leisure, there are bound to be sort of ups and downs at any one time. So I do take your point, but I can't see really a logical way around it.
Well, if I may suggest, as you review the risk register at Operations Board, I would have thought, and G&E, the quantum, the total of risk could be a KPI, if you like, so that you're aware of how that movement is going. Yeah, the estimated risk you could look at as an Operations Board to say, we're at X, or we're at X plus, we're on an upward trend or a downward trend. That would be the way I would monitor it, Councillor Wollaston, but what do I know?
I'm sure an awful lot, Councillor Brooks, but I'll explore that and come back to you.
Thank you, Councillor Brooks. I'm sure they're very valid points, and we'll let Councillor Wollaston take them on board. Councillor Stewart, do you wish to add to the conversation this evening?
Yes, please, Leader, and you're absolutely right. The points that Councillor Brooks has raised are absolutely valid. I will say that one thing to point out is that actually the document itself says the risk appetite will be reviewed during the period of the strategy, and where the council decides that there may be external factors or indeed even internal factors that might be changing the landscape, shall we say, that they can actually then, it's sort of like in a sliding scale, move up and down according to what that risk appetite might be at that point in time. And I think this is very new to this council, actually. We do, of course, have already, I have to say this as previous portfolio holder for internal governance, a robust risk framework. But what this is doing is building on that. And Councillor Brooks, if I could use one of your words that I think even in the limited time that I've been on the council, ambitious. And I think you reflected that in what you said to begin with. And I absolutely agree with you here. This is allowing some flexibility for this council to be ambitious, but with the right framework there to support all of the officers, the three lines of defence model that we have and will continue to have, where we have operational risk, and then that when it gets to a certain level, it moves up and it moves up. And you're absolutely right. We do discuss this at Operations Board, and that's that's not something that is going to change. And that is absolutely, I would suggest, where we would be able to then, as an executive, come together with the relevant officers and executive director to have some of those sort of decisions about whether we move that risk appetite on a sliding scale. So that's just sort of to respond to Councillor Brooks. The other thing that I wanted to say is that this is definitely a framework that I've worked with in private sector, and absolutely the 5 T's, the 3 lines of defence. It's a known model that works if it's followed and if people are trained and understand it. And I totally understand your point, Councillor Brooks, about making sure that we have that understanding at all levels within the council and within the members as well, because we're also having to make some decisions here. But I think by clearly defining the tolerance level at each stage of the risk assessment process, for example, when managing key projects or programmes of work, then this council will ensure that we continue to deliver sound improvements in our services and infrastructure in West Berkshire, as well as new and innovative and ambitious projects. And therefore, Leader, I'm happy to second this report.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. Thank you, everybody, for your contributions to that. We have a set of recommendations before us. We have somebody proposed, Councillor Wollaston's proposed, Councillor Stewart's seconded. The recommendations are laid out in 2.1, 2.2 and 2.3. I don't intend to read them all out, but can I see a show of hands from the executive members if they are voting in favour of the proposal of the recommendations?
Thank you, Leader. I can confirm that the recommendations have been approved.
Thank you, Shiraz. Can we therefore move on to item 8 on our agenda this evening, which is the Newbury Sports Ground joint land deal? Councillor Wollaston, I believe you would like to propose and introduce this report.
Thank you, Leader.
And before I let you speak, does this find a seconder?
It does, Leader. Happy to second.
Thank you. Back to you, Councillor Wollaston.
Thank you, Leader. I'm delighted to bring this report to Executive as it represents the culmination of a huge amount of work by officers to come to this fantastic solution to a problem which has been ongoing for a number of years. When I took over the leisure element of my portfolio almost exactly a year ago, this was my #1 priority. We had previously commissioned a report looking at council-owned land, which came up with 3 options, none of which were totally suitable. I asked the officers to reapproach the rugby club to see if there was an opportunity to create a community-based centre for sporting excellence and provide a new home for Newbury's football clubs. The rugby club responded positively, and after a fairly protracted series of negotiations, we have arrived at this point. The financial information is all contained in the Part 2 section. It is commercially sensitive, but to summarise, we've agreed heads of terms. A lease and an agreement to lease are ready to sign if executive approval is given to take a 40-year lease on a near 2.5-acre site on the Monks Lane frontage of the Newbury Rugby Club. There's a 20-year break clause to protect the council's interests. The intention is to submit a planning application by the end of next month or the beginning of the one after for a 3G artificial playing pitch with 2 stands totaling 150 and 50 people respectively, flood lighting, full fencing with turnstiles and 56 car parking spaces. In addition, a 3,000 square foot clubhouse will incorporate 4 separate changing rooms and 2 officials' changing rooms, allowing for mixed teams and the safeguarding of young people, as well as a function room with bar facilities, subject to licensing approval, obviously, a kitchen and an office. We started off with the intention of achieving what is called a Step 6 facility. Newbury FC currently require a Step 7 pitch, but we managed to achieve a Step 4 facility, which will allow the local teams to scale a number of levels above where they are today. There is also the possibility that the site could get to a Step 2 facility, according to the initial view of our consultants, but that would require significant additional capital investment, which cannot be justified at this time. Subject to the planning process, we hope to have the contractor on site by late summer to allow the pitch to be playable by March 2022, and Newbury FC to apply for higher ranking ahead of the new season. This is a quantum leap for the football community in Newbury, creating a top quality ground for men's, ladies and youth teams. It is something that Newbury should be proud of, and I'd hope there will be full support for this for all parties. I hope to be able to announce a further properly drained grass pitch and a further artificial pitch in the autumn. Sports England, the Football Association and the Rugby Football Union are all aware of these plans. This is all part of the playing pitch strategy that was approved by this administration in February 2020 to create a total of 6 new 3G artificial pitches and further quality grass pitches across the district.
Thank you, Councillor Wollaston. Members of the Executive, do you have any questions for Councillor Wollaston? Councillor McKinnon, do you wish to speak now or do you want to come back in?
I'll wait to the end, thanks, Leader.
Okay, thanks, Councillor McKinnon. Members of the opposition, do you have any questions for Councillor McKinnon? Councillor Pattenden.
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, I'm just wondering for this quantum leap. That's well, that's probably the most glorious description there's ever been of this whole sequence of events. Has there been any support so far from Sport England, the FA, and the RFU?
They've all been spoken to. It's not a formal consultation, but they, as I said, are aware of the plans, and we don't see any problems looming.
When does the formal process of engagement with them take place?
Well, I think it needs to be after this evening for a start, and probably once planning applications in.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Pattenden. Councillor Abbs.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. Councillor Wollaston, I'm just wondering about, you obviously started at 6 and then there's possibility of 2 now. And the further up we go in steps, the more likely it is of greater support and therefore more traffic and so on. So what modelling has been done in relation to this so that allows you to be confident that 4 to 3 or 2 is all deliverable, given Sandalford is also there and so on?
Just to be absolutely clear, all we're saying we're going to deliver at the moment is step 4. We're saying that the consultants have indicated that there may, and I stress the may, be a possibility of getting beyond that.
Yeah, I guess what I'm looking for, what traffic modelling has been done, or has it merely been a negotiation as to is the pitch available?
Some very preliminary traffic modelling has been done, but a detailed modelling exercise will be done ahead of the planning application.
Obviously, yeah, what would need to be. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Abbs. Councillor Masters.
Thank you, Chairman. Given the contentious nature of this whole project and the history of LRIE in general, what risk of failure do the council think there is in terms of not delivering on time because of contractual issues or lack of planning, etc. Also, second to that, given the contentious nature, does the council accept that there is a certain amount of reputational risk at stake here, and what are they going to do to mitigate that? Thank you.
Can I start off on your first point, which is the what happens if there's contractual issues or whatever? The agreement that we're hoping to come to this evening and to proceed with this is subject to planning consent, detailed planning consent being achieved. So if there is an issue over planning, then there's no risk to the council. Clearly, there's always contractual risk in terms of builders and so forth, but that's just part of the normal risk that one has to take in any project.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Councillor McKinnon, do you want to round off?
Yeah, thanks, Leader, and thanks, Councillor Wollaston, as well. This really does look like an outstanding facility and is a major step forward to the future of sport, not just football in Newbury. It's got my wholehearted support, as I'm sure I hope it will from our colleagues as well. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. There isn't a vote on this at this point because there is a part 2 to this paper, so there's no requirement to vote on this at this point. Can we therefore move on to item 9 on our agenda this evening, which is members' questions? I'd like to thank all of those members that have submitted questions to this evening's executive meeting. Please note that in accordance with the new processes, you don't need to say, I asked the question standing in my name. Your question will appear on the screen and will be answered by the relevant portfolio holder. You will then be given the opportunity to ask a supplementary question, but please remember that this must be to clarify the response provided and not introduce any new business. In accordance with paragraph 5.12.9 of the Constitution, where questioners have more than one question, only their first question will be answered. If after all other first questions have been asked and answered and there is sufficient time, we will answer subsequent questions. Please note, the time limit for members' questions is restricted to 60 minutes. And if your question has not been answered in that time, you will receive a written response within 5 clear working days. The response given either verbally at the meeting or in writing will be published on the council's website. I therefore invite Councillor Richard Sumner to answer Councillor Steve Masters' question A on the agenda.
Thank you, Leader, and thank you, Councillor Masters, for your question. The revenue funding for community transport in West Berkshire has remained constant since 2019, and there are no plans to reduce it further. In addition, since 2020, we've made additional capital funds available to support schemes, and that's at the tune of £50,000 last year, and the same for the next 2 years. With regards to services, we don't control the services provided by community transport operators, and the groups are different in the services that they provide. Community transport is a community-led response to local unmet transport needs, and it's therefore a matter for operators to decide on the level of service that they're able to provide. Our key stipulation when awarding the funding is that the charity, which is what they tend to be, shall only use the grant for the purpose of delivering community transport services that benefit residents of West Berkshire. And certainly my requirement of any contractual agreement is that there then follows an ability to review that service provision jointly with the provider. As for particular services, this could include dial-a-ride, minibus, volunteer car, demand response, local bus services. Many trips are made for the purpose of shopping, attendance at clubs or societies, and support groups, healthcare and medical appointments. We actively publicise the various community transport groups serving West Berkshire to help residents with individual journey requirements, or we invite residents to contact us directly if they're unable to secure appropriate support so that we can identify any unmet needs. Do you have a supplementary?
Not at this time. Thank you, Councillor Sommer.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Can we move to question B then, which is Councillor Abbs to Councillor Arderwater?
Yes, thank you for your question, Councillor Abbs. As you and we're all very well aware, as part of our declaration of a climate emergency in July 2019, we agreed to target the objective of achieving carbon neutrality by 2030. And that target was and still is not only for this council's own activities, but for the district as a whole. As regards the council's own carbon neutrality, I'm very confident that we will hit that date. I'd be optimistic we could significantly improve upon it. Regarding the district's overall carbon neutrality, this still remains a risky, a challenging, but still achievable target. One key aspect here is that we, West Berkshire Council, are in full control of the activities and that we need to do to put our own house in order. We have a duty and an obligation and a plan to influence and encourage and set an example to residents and businesses across the district to follow along this path too. But ultimately, the question of when the district overall will hit carbon neutrality will come down to decisions of said people and businesses and groups. So, for example, decisions on when to transit from a petrol fuel car to an electric car, how to reduce their car travel, increase active travel, dietary change, etc., etc. So we can still achieve 2030 if we, the entire district, make those decisions in a timely way. You have a supplementary.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Arderwater. Well, obviously, the reason I asked the question in the way that I did, which is a carbon zero wide across the whole district, is obviously we have a draft delivery plan which really focuses. It's taken 2 years to get to this stage, and I just wanted to test your appetite. So, are you really confident, given the draft delivery plan, where we are, the messaging that we've been giving out to the public, and so on and so forth, that we are actually on track to reach that target? I have to say I'm doubtful myself. I hope we do. I really would like to see you put a stake into ground and say, yeah, we are going to do this, rather than detailing all the risks of why we might not do this.
Yes, so again, thank you, Councillor Abbs. So the first point to bear in mind here is that what we are consulting on now is the draft initial delivery plan. The delivery plan is not going to be carved in tablets of stone and left and we admire it for 10 years. We are going to be regularly updating that, setting more specific goals, as time evolves, as we understand more on actions, as the wider environment set by government, as set by technology and people changes. So yes, it will evolve, and to judge the current draft as the final word from us is absolutely wrong. So no, I'm very confident we will. Indeed, I'm confident. And I look forward to us all in this chamber, in this virtual chamber, from all parties, spreading the word to residents and businesses of how, and encouraging of how they can follow in this path to carbon neutrality. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Arderwater. Before we move on, can I just remind all members to please be on mute unless you're actually asking a question or responding to a question. It just helps us not to hear your phones in the background. Thank you. Can we move on then to item C on the agenda this evening, which is Councillor Brooks to Councillor Sumner.
Thank you, Leader. And thank you, Councillor Brooks, for your question. In all honesty, I've got something which will probably be easier for you to receive in a written response for ease, in that it's a table with a lot of numbers in it. However, what I can say prior to that is that overall funding for community transport was reduced by 73% in 2019. Your question specifically runs from 2015-16. And there were changes in the way that the funding was provided over that time, and it's not just about one organisation. But as a formulaic approach, certainly the community transport element didn't change in 15-16, in 16-17, and in 17-18. It actually went up in 18-19 to 58,000 from 45,000. 2019-20 was when the change came in, and that at that point went down to 14,500. Now, what I'm talking to you there as numbers, as I say, are community transport based numbers. That is only part of the equation of the activity that has been provided. So there's also a contracted school transport service and concessionary fares element to that as well. And so it's quite complex to go through all that and for it to make sense to everybody. As I said, I'm more than happy to provide that table to you if that would help. And I'm sure that will give you the answers that you're looking for. But I think in essence, as I say, the community transport is probably what you're focusing on, not the whole amount. And as I say, 15-16, 16-17, 17-18, there was no change. 18-19, there was an increase. And then the budget change came in, and that's when the values started to come down for them specifically, as we looked for a more equal way of funding across community providers. I hope that provides enough of a response for you for now, but I'm happy to take a supplementary.
Well, I'd be pleased to see the table, and my supplementary is financial, so before the leader tells me I'm going off in a different direction. Is it simply a matter of the terms and conditions of a ready bus that is causing the issue, Councillor Sumner, or is it funding? However, whatever formula you use within the community transport budget for ready bus, what can you tell the people who use the service of the wrangling that's going on?
So there isn't a straightforward answer, Councillor Brooks, in all honesty, and that's where the complexity of it comes in, because of changes in the way the contracted schools provision was addressed. As I said, that's changed funding for the organisation. Concessionary fares stopped in 2017-18, so that no longer became part of the equation at all. The change in funding that you are talking about that was discussed in 2018-19 and came into effect in the 19-20 budget, that's when the new formula came in. That's when the finances were intended to be provided, as I said, in a more equal fashion across those that can provide.
Okay, thank you both. The next item is item D, but as Councillor Dillon is not here, we'll provide him a, oh, here goes that finger again. Why can't you use your hand like everybody else, Councillor Brooks?
Because it's quicker to put my finger up. Now, thank you. I think you were going to say you provide a written answer. That is what Councillor Dillon has requested. Thank you very much, Leader.
Yes, there's actually some factually errors in that answer, in that question. So we'll make sure we provide a written answer to Councillor Dillon. Can we move on then to question E, which is Councillor Alan Macro?
Leader.
Again to Richard, sorry. This is the Councillor Sumner show this evening.
Well, Councillor Williston had the first half, I'm having the second half. Councillor Macro, thank you for your question. I would like to point out first that the only reduction in the community transport funding took place in 2019, and I've just alluded to that in the previous response. And that was following a difficult decision to reduce funding to discretionary services. At the time, the council consulted with the community transport operators, as it was felt that they were in a better position to contact their clients to gauge the impact of the funding reductions. And clearly, the council does not hold details of community transport users, so it increases the complexity again of that consultation. However, given that I'm reviewing this with a fresh pair of eyes as a portfolio holder that's come into it since these decisions, consultations and changes took place, I do feel that perhaps we should have consulted more widely. It would have been difficult. There is a caveat on that, as I said earlier, that we haven't got the database of end users, service user details. The council's come a long way since 2019 in terms of consultation, and that's in reflection to feedback that we've received. We now have a new communications and engagement strategy which builds closer links between residents and the services they use. And I do feel that we are, were we looking, at similar changes in service now, we would have engaged more in line with this strategy and its principles. Do you have a supplementary?
Thank you. Do you think that this lack of direct consultation with the end users, being in fact that lots of them, or most of them, are vulnerable in terms of Redibus users, either disabled or elderly, and therefore come under the Equality Act, that the council may have acted illegally?
I don't think so. I think, again, I go back to saying what I've just said. We don't have those end user details. Those details are held by the service operators. And certainly in conversations that I've had, I've tried to establish what those details might be in order that we can either jointly or independently go forward to those users. And I think it's worth also noting that it's not just the end users. It may be registered carers. It may be that it's the parents that we need to contact. And I think, you know, that again, that's an important note to make. When you don't have the end user details, the only other option we would have had at that point, or could have taken at that point, would have been to go district wide. And then everybody clearly has the opportunity to make comment. As my understanding of what was done, as I said, was that it was the service operators that were engaged in consultation in order that they could come up with a solution that was the best fit for everybody with the funding that was available at that time.
Thank you both for your questions. Thank you, Councillor Macro, for your question and your answer, Councillor Sumner. Can we move on to then item F, or question F, which is Councillor Barnett, to Councillor Sumner?
Thank you, Leader. Councillor Barnett, thank you for your question. I'm just trying to get through to it now. Just bear with me 1 second. Thank you very much. I'm making an assumption, first and foremost, that you're referring to the final part of the racecourse road between its junction with New Road, beyond its junction, sorry, with New Road, which unfortunately does not have a pedestrian footway alongside. When the racecourse development went through the planning system, it was the intention to provide pedestrian facilities along this stretch. but because the road passes through common land, it could not be achieved at that time. It was not possible to widen the highway beyond the space that the road previously took up. So purely technical reasons. Alternative safe walking routes are available around the edge of Stroud Green, but I appreciate that they're not as direct as a path alongside the racecourse road would be. It is notoriously difficult to expand highways into common land due to the legal protections that common land has, and the procedures involved are time-consuming and somewhat arduous. I would not, therefore, wish to raise expectations that a footway can be provided in the short term, but what I will do is ask officers to investigate what is required and whether there is a realistic prospect of constructing a walking route as part of a future programme. Do you have a supplementary?
Thank you, Councillor Sumner. It was helpful that you've actually investigated it, because there was a preamble to the question which would have given you the history as well, which didn't come up on the question. So I very much value you investigating it. And clearly there is an issue, and you rightly say the problem is the common land issue. The unofficial footpath which is nearby, which you might identify as an alternative, unfortunately is an unofficial track across the other side of the ground, access to houses, and that I was going to suggest could be instated as a proper footpath, but perhaps that's something you might like to investigate. But clearly I have some concerns, and rightly you've obviously investigated, and there is an issue regarding people that have to access the highway when they're probably not in a safe position. So I look forward to your investigations, Councillor Sumner, and let's hope we come to a sensible conclusion on that.
Be glad to provide you an update as soon as we can offer one.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Barnett. Can we move on then to question G, which is Councillor Masters to Councillor Sumner?
Thank you again, Leader. And again, thank you, Councillor Masters, for your question. What I should say at the outset for clarity is that the council has not terminated any contract with Redibus. In fact, this particular agreement that is currently in the press was never reached. I believe you may be confusing our contracts with Redibus for specific services with the grant funding that the council gives for community transport. And I can assure you there's been no contract termination where Redibus is concerned on that basis. Redibus have served a notice of intent to reduce their community transport services in West Berkshire, but we will continue to work with them and with their residual services. And of course, we will work with alternative providers for our district. Do you have a supplementary?
Whether or not it's the termination of the Redibus services or not, do you think it's, you haven't answered whether or not it was handled well. Do you think there's been any reputational damage to West Berkshire Council as a result of this whole situation? Or has West Berkshire Council's reputation been enhanced?
I think that this is an unfortunate situation. We have had to react to a notice that's been given to us. Had we been able to engage in conversation, had we been able to provide a joined up, combined release of information to people, that might have been viewed in a completely different way than it currently is being viewed in press and social media. I don't feel that any termination that has ended up with the sort of press that it's currently getting could be reviewed as positive. That doesn't necessarily put fault on one side or the other. This, as I said, is, there's relationship work that needs to go on whenever you have an outsourced service. And I think that's what this is. I think this is one of those occasions where we look to work with our community operators. There's no easy way to say that this
blame. It's whether or not the public perception is negative or positive.
You've had your supplementary, and Councillor Sumner listened to your supplementary and is answering. So please do not interrupt Councillor Sumner. Councillor Sumner, have you finished?
I think I have, Leader. I don't think there's anything else I can add to that. There isn't a positive or negative out of this. This is an unfortunate situation which we are doing our very best to alleviate any concerns with the end users, and that is the key to this. It's the end users that need to be remembered.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Sumner. Can we move on to item H on our agenda this evening, which is Councillor Abbs to Councillor Sumner.
Thank you, Leader, and thank you, Councillor Abbs. For the benefit of other councillors and the public, your question to the executive on the 25th of March was around carbon footprint impact of cancelled bus services proposed in West Berkshire. As we've established, the council has not cancelled any bus services and are confident that the Redibus withdrawal will be covered by other service providers. I stand by the response that was previously given, that as far as we are concerned at the moment, there will be no carbon footprint impact. Do you have a supplementary?
Yes, thank you very much, Councillor Sumner. Obviously, there's slight semantics here in terms of the word cancellation. Most people would determine as the stopping of something happening. And reality is that's what's happened with Redibus. Whether the subtlety of the contract negotiation is now revealed.
Do you have the supplementary, Councillor Abbs?
I do, yeah. I'd like to understand Councillor Sumner's answer to scenarios where buses are no longer running, and why, given that you must have known about this Redibus situation, why we weren't able to answer my previous.
Okay, there was one question there. Let's go with that first question, Councillor Sumner.
Okay, I think what you're doing is making a statement that where a service was being provided, no service will be provided in the future. I have stated repeatedly that that is not the case. So that is the answer to the question. That is the answer to your question.
Could you please let Councillor Sumner answer?
Councillor Doherty, we're going to be back in the chamber soon. It's just a little bit petty.
Okay, let's move on. Let's move on to question I on the agenda this evening. Councillor Alan Macro to Councillor Cole.
Thank you, Leader, and thank you for your question, Councillor Macro. Excuse me. Following a meeting between officers of the respective councils earlier in April, I can respond that the likely effect on the adoption of the new Minerals and Waste Local Plan because of the Oxfordshire County Council response to the Regulation 19 consultation has no significant effect. Officers of the two authorities have agreed that some minor reworking of words for policies, together with the evidence base presented by the council, should overcome all the issues raised. These will be put to the examination as proposed minor modifications and agreed with Oxfordshire County Council as part of the statement of common ground between the authorities. Do you have a supplementary?
Thank you. I think I've been informed on the planning advisory group previously that Oxfordshire County Council had agreed on the issue of the minerals, if not the waste. So are you confident that they will maintain this latest agreement and not kind of renege on it like they seem to have done before?
Well, I think I've just answered that question, Councillor Macro, because I've said that they've agreed to some minor reworkings and there's going to be a statement of common ground. So I am confident.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Macro. And our final, we move on to question J, which is Councillor Barnett to Councillor Sumner.
Thank you, Leader, and thank you again, Councillor Barnett. Spring is always the busiest time for colleagues in the highways team following the wet and cold winter months, and this year clearly will be no exception. The council has made sufficient funding available to ensure our roads are kept safe. We've been further boosted by recent communication from the DFT, which has committed a fund value of in excess of £5 million. So very secure, I believe, that we will be able to deal with the coming requirements. Do you have a supplementary?
Yes, thanks very much for that answer, Councillor Sumner. many potholes, refills of potholes do need a considerable amount of remediation. And I've noted, and I don't know whether you've noted, Councillor, that some of the refills are not always of a permanent nature. They're an easy short-term fix. And therefore, sometimes they have to be refilled. Is there any way that your highways team is looking at perhaps a more permanent fixture, that the potholes will not reoccur, and therefore cost a costly exercise to the council and probably further claims against vehicles which have been subjected to another pothole incident?
Sorry, I think there are different levels of requirement on repair, and I think that's important to note. More than happy though to make sure we engage with officers to get a technical response if that would be best for you. Certainly we don't want to be repairing something that isn't going to last and find that we've been left with a bill for further repairs. And if that is the case, then that is something that we will take up with our contractor. So, you know, as always with these things, we are more than happy to receive information through on the report problem page on the council website. And if people are aware that is part of the issue, then they should make that comment. If they're aware, we can certainly look into it from there.
Thank you. I'll make sure that is referred back in the appropriate department. Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you, Councillor Barnett, and thank you, Councillor Sumner. Can we move to the final question for this evening from members, which is Councillor Abbs to Councillor Sumner.
Thank you, Leader, and thank you, Councillor Abbs. QR codes on dog waste bins, actually, that is something that we've been having numerous conversations on. At the moment, we're looking at this as part of the upgrade of the council's report of problem system, which I've just referred to. And as it stands, we could see no reason why QR codes would not be compatible as a solution. However, we also intend to number our dog waste bins so that those less technically minded members of the public can report specific bins by more conventional means too. And I think it's worth noting that a QR code in itself isn't an answer. It may give the member of the public the ability to open up the appropriate app or go to the appropriate location. But there does need to be a level of tech savvy user at the end of that. And I wouldn't see it therefore as being a single hit solution. Do you have a supplementary?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. I don't think the QR code in itself, in the way I was described, was ever meant as a single shot solution. It's an aid to getting the problem solved. So my supplementary question would be, will you consider it as at least as an interim step, as it costs almost nothing and is easy to implement? Yeah, absolutely. As I say, it's part of an ongoing conversation. So yes, happy to commit to that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you for your questions this evening. We can now move to item 10 on our agenda, which is the exclusion of press and public. Can I ask members to agree by raising their actual hand that the press and public leave the room in accordance with Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972?
That's carried. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you. And can I remind members to wait until our Zoom host has confirmed that public attendees have left before we start the next point of our agenda this evening?